Do you have, yes you do, thank you. Thank you. Let me do a test slide advance. Okay.
You gotta hold it, make sure you hold it up above that edge.
Yeah, so far it worked pretty good, but okay. Okay, hi everybody, my name's Andy Bochman, work at Idaho National Lab. I live in Boston, so I'm in the same time zone right now as people who also live in this time zone. This is a Smart City panel, but the presentation is a Megacity presentation. And one of the points that it will make is that you can't have a megacity without it substantially leveraging technologies. This is also a presentation that's set in the future in 2025. And I think you'll notice some things seem a little far out and a lot of things don't. They'll seem pretty familiar. For those of you who've read the book Ghost Fleet, you'll find things that are right on the cusp of where we are and where we're going to be shortly. So yeah, this project was Mike Asante's baby. He approached me with the idea, and it took us about a year to agree on a format and actually build the sucker. And it became what it is, the paper, which is easily searched on the internet, with CSIS as the think tank that published it. And it also became sort of a two-man show, with each playing a perspective part. So I'm going to do a reduced version of really it's a 2.5-man show because one of them's Mike Asante, the other one's me. So it may be less than fully satisfying, but at least you get a taste of it. Mike is an originator of this idea, originator and mentor of operational technology, IC security training for many of us, including me. I can say I wouldn't be here in a number of different ways if not for Mike. And he authorized me to tell you, some of you know him from a distance, some of you know him closer, but I've already encountered a couple people who are relatively close to him but aren't aware of his current condition, so I'm going to tell you now. And I'm not going to tell you too much detail, but hopefully it'll be enough. He was, first of all, let me do background. So he is a Navy intel guy, because some people don't know him at all. He's a Navy intelligence officer. Some of his earliest experiences on that ship informed what he eventually became. I'll just mention two other points in his career. He was the chief security officer at a very young age of one of the largest utilities, American Electric Power, AEP. Also was chief security officer of NERC, which basically is the center of the universe for grid security on the bulk system. And again, he was pretty young to be in that position too, and he did a great job. He's also a cancer survivor. About 14 years ago, he had a type of cancer that affected his bone marrow, and it was not easy. He went through huge rounds of chemo and radiation, and he made it. Also has a young family too, so add a little context, he has 3 kids and a really nice wife. But anyway, he survived, and not to put you too much in cancer mode, every year subsequent to his clean bill of health, you go back and get your blood tested, and they give you a thumbs up because you're completely clean and you made it and you're all right and you're free and clear. And that went on for Mike year after year after year until this fall, when instead of being completely clean, he was completely not at all good. So it's bone marrow related. It's a type of cancer that is related to the fact that he had it before. It's called treatment-induced MDS. And so he's, again, in the early stages of chemo, and pretty soon, in a few months, he's going to fly out to Seattle to a special clinic and see if he can beat this thing, but his prognosis is not positive, and I'll leave it at that. His absence is made more visible for people that were wondering where he is when the annual SANS ICS Security Summit comes around, which it will here back in Orlando in just about a month from now. And that was his show. That's his part of that training company and that movement. Rob Lee and Tim Conway, 2 other very fine fellows, are going to try to fill the void and co-MC that presentation, but they already know they're going to fail filling his shoes. It's just the fact. They're going to fail, but they want to do a good job and make it as good as possible in his absence. So we'll be thinking about him when we're there. Okay, so that's the preamble I wanted to express, and thanks for allowing me to do it, Sid, and for hearing me out, you guys in the audience, okay? All right, so without further ado, here we go. This is a dark preview, which means it's not that happy, and I'm holding up like Sid said. Okay, I should have edited these words more. Feel free to try to read them when you can, but I'll say this slowly so you can try to increase them. You can increase your retention of them, but basically it talks about anticipating future assaults and to be creative and use your imagination, which is I'm going to invite you to do. I need you to do it during the course of this presentation, which will be very awkward if you don't have an imagination or you don't go to the places I'm trying to send you. So don't just look at what has just happened in 2016 in the past. Don't look just in the rearview mirror as a predictor of the future. Imagine some things that could happen using inferences from different trends that we see going on. And we're going to put you in this fictional megacity a few years out where this is going to play out. Okay, so use your imaginations. This is the paper from whence this presentation came. You can find it. It's easy. It's both, and the presentation, like the presentation, it has aspects of it that are for lay people. So if you have very little background in this domain that we live in that brought us together at ARC, you're just a citizen of the world and you care, then this is for you. It also has some concepts that are pretty helpful, I'd argue, for subject matter experts that are trying to really demonstrably improve the state of affairs. Okay, here we're going to start to go into it now. We did this for 4 cities, both in the paper, 4 different megacities, and then in the presentations that we did online and at the SAND structure. It says, the second paragraph here says, the technologies that help the infrastructure manager of these cities deal with the incomprehensibly complex operations of keeping those systems running are at once and the same time the same technologies that make them so fragile, so easy to push over, or even just to fall over under the weight of those complex technologies. That's sort of the problem. In order to have a megacity that functions in 2025, it can't run without IoT, IIoT, cloud, and AI, and all the things that are with us now and are going to be more with us in a handful of years. But because you're going to need those things to run those cities, you're going to be more susceptible to problems that could happen. And yes, we will hit on cascades, the way Sid emphasized. The cities were Bangkok, Shanghai, Mexico City, and New York City. I don't know if many of you follow Twitter very much, but I have a son in the Peace Corps in China, and he was recently visiting a friend. Whenever he's on break, he gets to travel. He was in a city that I think formerly was known as Chongqing. I'm not sure how to pronounce it now, but I saw a documentary on it. It's 25 million people. And they grow by over 500,000 every year and put up 100 to 200 skyscrapers a year. And there's no inventory of all the buildings in that city, but there's new trains and new transit and new electricity, and new telco all over the place. And it makes the United States, to me, feel a little bit provincial, right? I live in Boston. It's not a mega city. It's a city. It's nice. I recommend it. We build a building or 2 every year. But man, you look at what's going on in China and the technologies we care about, the technologies that are at play in this presentation. That's where it's happening big time, and so might be a place to learn from. Okay, these are good points for you as we're going to start to blend into the actual part of the presentation. But I think all these points are important to make. So predictive technologies, and sometimes I'll read things, which I don't like to do, but I'm going to do it. Predictive technologies and machine learning will be essential for our collective future. Even well-balanced systems will be susceptible to perturbations that can grow very large due to centralization, centralized learning, and as we connect many things. Innovators, this is Mike calling out to industry. Innovators, take notice. Defenders can harness the power of this analysis using these systems to quickly determine unauthorized changes, like tampering and experimentation, and use machine learning to spot patterns. And final call to action is for innovators to make corresponding investments and advancements to leverage breakthroughs in cognitive systems and data and apply these capabilities to analyze and predict security-related outcomes. This is funny because for me, my whole world is often spent time talking about the methodology called consequence-driven cyber-informed engineering that Marty did a nice job unpacking today. That's a little bit retro. This is entirely future-oriented. Take maximum advantage of these new technologies that are burgeoning, and maybe they can help give us a leg up, or at least help us keep up on some of these challenges. Cascading systems, cascading problems in tightly overlapping and interconnected systems. Slides that seem to turn themselves mysteriously when you just wish they would just hold steady because you could say one coherent thing. Yeah, okay, just hold on. Just take it easy. I am not pushing it really hardly anything, I swear. I'd be happy to be, yeah. All right, so you're seeing, as it goes back and forth, I think we saw sad face, happy face, and Mark Andreessen. Just stop, okay? The sad face was meant to say, and that was a horrifying picture of an overly congested, poverty-stricken section of a city. I was in Bangkok last year. It was kind of like that. When we think of megacities teeming and overpopulated with poor services, poor governance, weak infrastructure, nobody wants to live in that environment if they had any choice. I think I also had a nice happy picture of Times Square on a good sunny day. And that's a wonderful place to be, no matter how many people are there. If you're the right personality, you can consider that a highlight of civilization. And the last picture there was, I don't want to go back to it, is Mark Andreessen. He's the founder of Netscape. He had a somewhat ovoid head shape devoid of hair. And he's now a futurist. He's a self-proclaimed futurist. And he basically is just calling out all the trends that we're seeing, right? Everything has a processor in it. Everything is run by software. Everything is connected. And it's increasingly intelligent and communicating and sometimes revising itself in ways that have interesting implications for the future. He's not an alarmist. He's positive about it. He's all positive. It's all going to be good. Just take it easy, you security alarmists. All right. We have overlapping. Can I take manual control of the laptop?
Can you advance for them, because they're just going by themselves.
Which slide do you want to be on?
I don't really care as much as it just stops a little bit. Yeah. Go forward one. Thank you. We'll stop on Mexico City, because I wanted to say, so the city in question is Mexico City.
Now we've got.
Is this automation? Yeah. Too much information, too much automation.
Did you practice this with timing or anything? Is that what's automatic?
No, it's not supposed to be. No. All right, see that city? Look at how dense that is. That's pretty amazing, right? And that's on a nice day. It's pretty good, Mexico City. I haven't been there. I want to go there. At the risk of problems, can you try to go forward one slide? Okay, imagine for those of you of a certain age, the teletype clicking sounds in the background from the press office. Yeah, phones are ringing. Good, yeah, perfect. Lots of talking, maybe some smoking clouds. Okay, so this guy is going to do it. This is a dispatch from, this is for people that live in Mexico City and are hearing news ports around the world. Then there's going to be behind the curtains view that comes primarily from Mike. City scenario, Mexico City, dispatch, Radio Formula, Cadena Nacional, October 26, 2025. In other big cities this is where your imagination matters. In other big cities around the world, we've seen cyber attacks on infrastructure spark the devolution of city services and, almost instantaneously, civil order. What's playing out here in Mexico's beloved capital is a reversal of that sequence, with all too familiar city employee strikes that have slowed the city to a crawl for the past few months, setting the stage for something quite out of the ordinary. We Mexicans have long ago learned to expect and tolerate near crippling bureaucracy and inefficiency. But Mexico City has been the exception in many ways, in business-fueled perpetual motion, despite the friction of its corrupt and bloated government. Here's what just happened. Tens of thousands of strikers and other protesters, enraged by the latest rounds of pay cuts, turned out on the streets and brought the city to a week-long standstill. Incessant social media campaigns in support of the strikers were to be expected, as were cyber attacks of mixed success on city government websites. But when hundreds of buildings started acting possessed, it became clear that a more disruptive type of cyber assault might be occurring. It now appears that over the course of approximately 90 minutes, half of all the elevators in the city stopped running, often stuck in between floors, straining thousands of people all over the city in truly desperate situations. How the cyber protesters were able to make this happen is anyone's guess. One thing is certain, though. First responders, including police, fire, and assorted facilities engineers, were 100% occupied when the next crisis hit. Within a few hours of the start of the elevator troubles, a handful of other buildings forced their occupants into the street. In one 3-block area closest to the protests and not far from the stadium, fire alarms and sprinkler systems activated despite no reports of smoke or fire. One could sense the beginning of mass panic. With the police fully engaged in frantic rescue attempts across the city and the military not yet activated, the streets began to boil. And it was about this time that the attack on the Estadio Azteca turned out the stadium lights, emptying tens of thousands onto already jammed streets and crushing hundreds to death in the process. The stampedes and barbarism that ensued and expanded from there have left many thinking there may be no point of return. Slide advance, please. AI-assisted omniscient cyber forensicist. That's Mike. Next. Yeah, that's good. Okay. No, not yet. Back to the, yeah. Okay. I'm not rattled. Okay, so there's going to be a stage setting part, and then there's going to be the play-by-play from the adversaries. Then I'll bring you down the home stretch. Remember, it's 2025. It's going to be familiar. Over the last 15 years, the operations and maintenance of heavily used machines like elevators and escalators have been brought into cloud analytic platforms with remote access, diagnostics, and predictive maintenance. The collection of diagnostic data combined with predictive analytics and remote access provides more efficiency in servicing and enhancing the already high levels of availability. All good. Instruments collect data and feed it over wireless pathways to communication gateway devices and then to a controller and head up to a cloud platform. The cloud platform software provides a view to remotely manage hundreds of thousands of machines while collecting data from millions of sensors. The local building managers are able to receive a feed of the transport systems in their facilities, and service providers and manufacturers can monitor machine health and maintenance for an entire fleet. Software aids engineers in determining if and when technicians need to be sent out, while equipping them with information for tests and the work that needs to be performed. That's for today. Sensors can provide vibration, speed, and temperature data to building managers and service technicians' smartphones and AR glasses, armed with maintenance applications. That's slightly tomorrow. These global systems harness powerful core analytics, saving money by improving computing efficiency and machine performance. Engineers on different continents can diagnose faults and performance irregularities on large numbers of machines each. That's the setup. Here's the view from the attackers. Centralization has increased productivity of service providers, but it also provides an adept individual or group with the ability to remotely interact with many machines at once. A group of hackers began toying around and found easy ways to make money. They were smart, and they stayed below the radar for the most part. This is not a nation state. The group acted more like a club than a gang. Recent social tensions had been a big topic at a lot of their gatherings. And 2 of their members had been experimenting with their apartment's building's automation systems. They found it comical that wireless network broadcasts would advertise central elevator data. Their explorations brought them into contact with sensor data streams and a host of IP addressable microcomputers. Some had web interfaces and others did not. It was mostly just for fun until their explorations uncovered remote connections and evidence of interactions that came from mobile phone apps and a central data repository. When 3 of the club members were caught up in the strike, they began encouraging other members to get involved. One of the members was put in the hospital at the hands of riot control police, and finally the group came together to plan an assault. They used their own apartment building access to figure out how to access the systems of buildings surrounding the protests. The idea was simple. Just dump more people into the streets so the police would need to pull back and city officials would be forced to negotiate with the strikers. This handful of hackers fully appreciated the potential consequences of their actions. Their actual plan was basic. Put elevators into shutdown and maintenance modes while removing or changing IP addresses and configurations so machines could only be restarted on site. The only thing holding them back was scale. They had caught the username and password for 3 buildings, but some implementations had not been accessed recently. However, a Google search yielded a hard-coded user account made by the manufacturer. Then they were in, all over the city. Soon they were knocking machines offline by the 100. Only 2 more steps. The next move was a little more interactive as the group tripped evacuation alarms from a cracked building management application. The alarms got people moving, but it was the triggering of the fire suppression systems based on bad data inputs to temp sensors that finished the job. A few hours of play created this chaos and proved to be enough to tip the city into a prolonged emergency with deadly results. That's it. So wasn't Russia or China or a well-resourced crime syndicate. It was some, we'll say, social activists and maybe ne'er-do-wells, or occasionally do-wells, that set this thing into motion. But the city was set up perfectly for them to do their part and then for it to just ripple through and turn into a freaking nightmare. And we have, if you read the paper, you'll see what happens in the other cities. Some of them are more complicated, and the adversaries are more sophisticated. And in one case, things just fall over. And everybody thinks it's cyber, but they don't really. There's no way to know. Next slide, please. I got to step through a couple, and I'm out of here, so Stuart can go. This slide, now this is like, so this is when we're doing the presentation, trying to give tease out some of the lessons and learnings. Certainly, we've talked about concentration being a problem, good for efficiency. Connectivity, good for efficiency, gets you hyper-efficiency in 2025. What else does hyper-efficiency get you? Get you hyper-dependency. You let everybody else go, you don't have enough people, and pretty soon, when something goes wrong, now what are you going to do? Those people are gone. Mini lesson from Ukraine, right? Attackers, opportunity, and actions down the right-hand side, which I call out a narrative. There they are in bullet form. Next slide, please. Thank you. Wetware depletion. Wetware depletion. You can leave it where it is, but wetware depletion is basically taking out the people, which you could say is sort of what we're doing with efficiency. We're taking out the people, which is great as long as AI takes care of everything. We will be good. We'll be good. AI also will help us with cybersecurity. On this slide, we see these things, cautionary observations. What do you want to do if you don't want to end up with a Mexico City because you're a planner or a cybersecurity person, city planner, et cetera? What do you want to do? In this case, we have issues with cell overload, and this is from some of the other cities too. They can't keep up with the amount of data that needs to be moved around. Restoration overload, I think we saw some of that in our scenario. There's just no way to bring things back up, and the way the attackers did it, they made it impossible unless you had to go there on site in thousands of places, right? Cascades from one system to another, and not always technology, but sometimes civil cascades, just the sheer mass of humanity all clustered together in one space. I think Sid gave some examples of that from a real tangible example that happened just now. Software, large-scale systemic risk, but as it becomes more monocultural, more one thing, because it's efficient and better that way, it's also one-stop shopping for adversaries. And complexity, all of this, we get complexity. I don't know how many of you know Dan Geer. He's, I think, like the poet laureate of our space, of the cybersecurity space. He has big sideburns too. Every once in a while, about once in a year, he comes out with an authoritative keynote. He recently published a paper in the Hoover Institute called The Rubicon. Here's two things I pulled from it for this presentation. One statement is, and I haven't even made it through yet, he's really hard to read, but he's really brilliant. Cascade failure is where complexity and interdependence intersect. Complexity meets dependence, interdependence, get those together, cascades, picture the dominoes. Second thing he said is, as complexity hides interdependencies, because you don't really know, because it's so complex, no one understands how the system really works or what it needs in order to function, which is increasingly the case in software-centric systems. As complexity hides interdependencies, Geer says, ergo, complexity is the enemy of security. In the previous presentation and previous panel, I asked a question, said to the panelists, what do you make of the statement, efficiency fights security? And that seemed to get them a little bit riled. How do we get efficiency? I'll posit through automation. I'm not anti-automation, by the way. But how do we get it? We often get it through automation. Automation cannot help but add complexity. Ergo, I'm using Dan's word, efficiency and security are not friends, at least as we currently think of them. Next slide, I think we're done. Okay, yes, so let me just say, can we go back to the happier picture? If we're gonna try to end up in a vision of future cities, like maybe alternating back and forth is helpful too. If we're gonna end up in not this, if we don't want this, but we want that, then we got to make sure we are very proactive and vocal, making sure to whatever part you play in this score, in this play, that we voice these concerns loud and often to the right people who can make a difference. So that we end up in more like a Star Trek of the city, future city, and not that now it's a total blackout. Thank you very much.